Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Bear Down Ballers here on the Field of 68. I'm Ryan Wall, joined once again on this holiday week by Jordan Pollock. And Jordan, for the first time, and it feels like forever here, Arizona won back-to-back games, got back to their winning ways. They're 6-5 now, won against Sanford by 32 points, followed it up against Central Michigan, 53-point win, 85 combined points that they won by this week. First of all, how are you doing on this holiday week? And what are your kind of thoughts about how Arizona looked this past week?
I'm doing great, man. It's been a great holidays. It's been kind of interesting because I don't feel like we've had some big blockbuster days for sports wise, at least from the college basketball perspective lately. But I'm doing great. Some things I take from those games, I don't really know. I think it's good to see them play well against lesser competition, and no disrespect to Samford or the Central Michigan Chippewas. I think one of the more underrated mascots in college sports. No disrespect to them, but I don't see them competing really even at the mid-major level. And so I would hope that they would be able to put these kind of wins together. And I think we've seen them kind of tweak some things with starting Anthony Del Orso these last few games. I think that's been a cool thing to see and how they've been successful in that. But it doesn't really mean much if you can't do it against actually top-notch elite power opponents.
Yeah, 100%. We talked about this last week before these games that not a lot about their opponents this past week. It was more about Arizona, more about them showing and proving that their players are still capable of putting out solid performances no matter who the opponent is. And they did just that. To me, though, Del Orso was great. I'll get to him in just a minute. But Caleb Love, the guy that everybody talks about the most, and the guy that is only averaging a little over 15 a game this season, a dip from 18 last year. He's had back-to-back games with 20 points or more, 23 against Sanford, 24 against Central Michigan. Looked really good, and he's doing it shooting over 50% in both of those games. We know he hasn't been a high percentage shooter at
Yeah.
Arizona or even in his college career period. But I thought this was inspiring to see because not just this, but he's had 4 20-point games in the last seven. So he is starting to round into form and kind of be that Caleb Love, that version of Caleb Love that we were expecting this season. And I think that was the best thing to see is that he's still, because even he could still bring it at any night and he's still capable of that. Because as hard as it is to kind of play these teams and to get up for these teams, it's hard for these players as well. For a Caleb Love who was struggling, but to get up for these games and put on these performances, it shows me that the players are still invested in what Tommy Lloyd is telling them and coaching them. And it seems like this team is still fighting and still ready to make a big impact this season.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think that's going to be a huge big benefit, especially if he can take these small sample size of pretty much what he hasn't done the entire season. Like you said, scoring into the 20s, and that's a very big component of what this team has been missing this entire season is a go-to scorer. And I know going into the year, that's I think what we assumed we were going to get, but that's not the Caleb Love we've gotten. And so I think a lot of their struggles have been from looking around saying, okay, Caleb can't get going. Who else is going to get going? And there's still guys that are in like still almost even still trying to figure out their own roles. And so for them being asked to do that is just it hasn't been work it hasn't worked, obviously, at 6-5. Hasn't worked against the top premier talent in some of these great non-conference games that they've played. So that's going to be the big thing. If he can string together some games, some weeks of consistent play at high efficiency, that's going to be the biggest difference I think with this Arizona team.
Yeah, 100%. It's not going to be one game. Like you said from the top, they got to do it against the real opponent one time this season before we can label them kind of anything concrete. But then again, these games are great for just that, like you said, is building and figuring out everyone's role as a whole. And another guy that stood out to me in these couple games that I really liked his play was Toby Awaka. He had 9.7 boards against Sanford. Doesn't stick out a ton, but he is efficient from the field. And then he followed up with a double double, 10 points, 10 rebounds. I really think this guy has done one of the best jobs on this team out of the newcomers of just fitting in, bringing that energy. He's hustles almost every play on both ends of the floor. And I really think we talked about Keyshawn Johnson bringing that energy. I really think he's done a great job of being that and fitting into that Keyshawn Johnson role. And it really seems like he's not going to be a guy that we're going to worry about to show up when it matters because we know this is what he is, and this is still a great player. Don't get me wrong. People could forget or whatever. Toby Awaka barely played at Tennessee last year. He played
Mhm.
in a very limited role. So to get him near a double double every night, that's really solid production, and that's great to see. What do you think about him and kind of his overall impact on this team?
Yeah, real quick, you mentioned Keyshawn Johnson. I think it's awesome to talk about him for a sec. He just got elevated to a full contract with Miami Heat. Sad to see they've had injuries, and that's a reason, but he has been playing very well in the G League. So we love to see former Wildcats continuing to play great at the next level.
A
But
hundred
yes,
percent, 100%. And just
yeah,
to piggyback off that for a second,
go ahead.
yeah, Keyshawn Johnson. I thought he should have been. I had him as a first round talent in that draft this past June. I really loved him, and obviously him and fellow teammate Pella Larson being on the
Yep.
same team. Great to see. Great organization, and just two impact players and high character guys. So great to see. And what were you saying? Continue.
Yeah. And I think ditto on Toby Awaka. He's played very well. He's been consistent. And I think comparing him to Keyshawn Johnson, I think the first thought I get is kind of what we came into the year expecting from them. And their expectations were not super high. We thought this guy would be a role player and maybe help a little bit with boards, a little bit with points, but kind of just almost be a body that's going to help
Yeah,
defend and help put other guys in successful places to score. So with that, it's been awesome to see like Keyshawn surpassed expectations last year. And I think Awaka, he's done that. Like I didn't think he was going to start. I doubt probably even
I
Tommy
didn't.
Lloyd thought he was going to start with the injuries that Mo Krivas has had and Henry Vesar's scattered minutes. And so he's played really well, but I think a big piece of that is him just living up and beyond like the lowish expectations he had to where you look on the other side of the coin, like you look at a guy like Trey Townsend and his expectations coming into this year, and what he's done is not lived up to those in any way whatsoever.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think we talk about this all the time, and it's especially a big thing in this era of college basketball is players that are coming from low end, D1 schools and then working their way up to big D1 schools. We've seen guys do it and do it at a high level, but then again, and I keep saying this because I didn't personally, I didn't have 12, 15 plus point per game for Trey Townsend this year because I know about the level difference. And to me,
Mm-hmm.
that's always been a big factor. I did expect more. I did expect more consistency. I did expect him to be more confident and play a bigger role in this offense, which he just isn't on a nightly basis. That's all true. But then you got a guy like Toby Awaka who was at Tennessee for a couple years, was under a great coach in Rick Barnes and has experience playing at a high level, even if it was in a limited role. I think those guys have a better chance to expand, kind of just like Jaden Bradley, who played multiple years at a high level and now finally
Mm-hmm.
getting that opportunity. But Jordan, another guy, although he didn't get a ton of run against Samford, he did get a lot of run against Central Michigan because that game was out of reach before I could even blink my eyes. It seemed like, and that was Conrad Martinez played 19 minutes, some of the most minutes he's played all season long. 9 points, 5 assists, 3 for 4 from the field, only one turnover. I was really impressed with his ability to be that leader on the offensive end and kind of just get other teammates involved and he to me he really did a good job of that. And also I really like his ability on the defensive side of the ball. I really think he has upside there. He's that he kind of he's like that TJ McConnell. He was there last week to get inducted,
Yep.
obviously,
Yep.
but just brought sparked my mind. He's kind of that like feisty, undersized point guard, and I really think that I didn't have tons of high expectations for him, not even just this year, but in the future. But I'm starting to come around. I think he's going to carve out a nice role for himself in the next 2 years and be an impact player for this program.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I think like his situation, I think plays perfectly with what you're saying about the era of the transfer portal we live in, to where guys, if they're at mid majors and they ball out and they play really well, they try to transfer up, get bigger money, play in bigger conferences, make more of a name for yourself. And then also comparable with guys that are having less roles at bigger schools and then just trying to transfer around. I think it's interesting. I the first name that it was in my head was Kerr Kriisa, and I think that was just because primarily he was a 3 point shooter and then he was dribbling up the court trying to set everybody else up. So I think TJ McConnell one's probably a lot better comparison.
No, but
But
I see where you're coming from there. I mean, it's
yeah,
a recent guy. Kurt did bring that energy.
yeah,
We haven't seen obviously that much. This is just in the way beginning stages for Conrad. Hasn't played
yes.
as much as that. We haven't seen his character, come out and stuff like that. That's all down the line stuff. But I'm just saying, like I said, we know it's so hard to take a lot from these games, but just little things I'm picking up on here and there for some players. Did anyone else kind of do anything that caught your eye of note?
Yeah, I think we're talking about mid-major transfers. I think Anthony D'Orso and just his ability to continue to score the ball, I think, has been really impressive. I think coming from Campbell, I think there's definitely a potential idea of like scorers can score no matter where they're at. And definitely that's possible. You look at Damian Lillard, one of the best scorers in the NBA, went to Weber State, a mid-major, and they really haven't been great since he's been there. But that's another thing. And to where like for some guys that is true, and so I think it's been interesting to see how well Anthony Orso has been able to shoot the ball, because shooting can travel, defense can travel, and that's the one thing that I think we've been talking about him the most. And I think that's the one thing I've seen somewhat of an improvement on from him throughout the course of this year, is him being able to stay on the court in defensive possessions and not having to get him out of the game immediately when he screws up.
Yeah, 100%. And yeah, he did have some brutal stretches on the defensive end of
Yep.
the floor early in the season against big opponents. But yeah, I think he's also been another feisty guy on defense this past couple games. Had 14 points against Sanford, followed up with 8 points, 3 rebounds, 3 assists. Those other areas, I do think he's growing with. He's not just being a guy. First couple games, he seemed a little more timid. He would just stand in the corner, wasn't really looking to get other teammates involved, and wasn't really looking to add that much else. But yeah, it seems like he's kind of adding to his game still. He is another veteran guy. He has played a lot of basketball in college. So yeah, I really like what he's doing, and yeah, I really think this team is one of the for the first time in a long time. It seems in Arizona the past 5 6 years when they get to conference play, their team's already figured out their rotations, their starting fives already figured out, their 3 to 4 backups are already figured out. Everyone's minutes are set. I really feel like this is the first time in the last lot of years, bunch of years here, where we don't really even know who are going to be the starting five at the end of the year in crunch time. We don't know who are going to be the couple guys to come off the bench. So I really think this is good time for this team to figure it out. And I think all these guys are still fighting for their spot. They're still fighting for their minutes because, like we've seen, Conrad Martinez had a good game. You never know. His minutes could start to increase. And then you have guys
Hmm.
like Trey Townsend who haven't produced as much as we have thought. His minutes could start to decrease a little bit. We don't know. So, because this team, I don't think has as many set in stone guys where it's like the past couple years, it's like Umar Balo's starting, Boswell's starting, Kirk Reese is starting when he was here, and obviously when you had Tabelis and Matherin and those guys were great, obviously. But it's like this year, I think it's all of a mismatch, like of guys, and I don't really think they have that set five or so. So yeah, I think it's really cool. But Jordan, something else I wanted to talk about, kind of transitioning here, is not about the games in the past, not about the games in the future. We'll get into their game against TCU, Big 12 opener in just a couple minutes. But before we got there, I want to talk about Arizona's ranking in the country, obviously, in the AP top 25. They're not featured there. They were earlier in the season in the top 12, but after losing a couple of games, we know they dropped out. But in two of the major ranking systems in the country, one being the net rankings, one being KenPom, still has Arizona in the top 26. Ken Palm has Arizona 24th overall. And obviously, this was before, or the net rankings were before this week. So before this week on the net, they were ranked 26. So they even could increase with the two victories, even though they weren't any quad, like they weren't the
Yeah.
top couple quad wins there. But what do you think about that and kind of this new age of college basketball where they have these advanced ranking systems and where Arizona has fit into that this year?
I think a few things. I think it shows just how talented our guys still are. I think despite so many times in the battle for Atlantis and against Wisconsin and against Duke, it just didn't seem like they had any flow. They didn't really have any good groove in the game. And yet they're still competing. They're still putting up numbers and they're inconsistent through that. And so I think that's one thing that I think kind of shows on that is that like the eye test isn't always everything too, you know.
100%. Yeah, they still have a ton of upside, and I think a big thing is that they've already played five quad one teams. They're 0-5 in quad one. We
Yeah.
talked about this before we got on here, but still, a lot of these teams even ranked ahead of them. Just a couple off the top of my head, or off the top of the list. For example, Florida, they're 2-0 in quad one, only two games. Houston, they're 0-3 in quad one games, but they only have three. Mississippi State only has three. Pittsburgh has three. Alabama, they have five as well. But some of these teams above them do not have even five quad one games. So
Hmm.
I think at such an early part of the season that I really think when we get into this conference play, it's really going to test Arizona because if Arizona could get off to a good start in conference play and get a quad one win or two, I think Arizona is going to shoot right back up because like we've seen, a lot of these teams have lost a bunch. Not as much as Arizona has, but this is to me a really weird year in the sport because I just don't feel like there's any true dominant teams, and I really feel like it's one of the most wide open years in a long time.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think probably the biggest example I can think of right now is Dusty May at Michigan. I thought Michigan would be middle of the pack at best in the Big Ten, especially with kind of where they're at with Juwan Howard last year. They're at the bottom of the Big Ten, and then all of a sudden they're ranked in the top. I think they're at the top 23 right now in the AP poll, but they went into Wisconsin and beat them in their first conference game. Like they're like yeah, and I think a lot of that is just attributed to the crazy time of collegiate athletics we live in with the transfer portal and NIL. That rosters can get flipped so quick, and it just shows again, like you keep alluding to it, of how important roster construction is to where teams can completely change from from a spring to the winter, much less like from a year to year or from the summer to the winter. And so it it it's interesting, but like I just feel like the big thing I feel like we say so many times is just like there's no consistency. Like There's no consistency with this Arizona team. Where are they at? There's no consistency with the college basketball world. Who's good? Who isn't? Who's great? Who's not great? And so I think that's what one thing that makes it so fun though in a way now,
Yeah.
like especially we look at college football, like it was like the SEC is heading above everybody else, and it's like now where I think there's 8 teams left in the playoff and only one of them's from the SEC. And it just flipped the overall narrative that existed 2 years completely on its face. Blue bloods can get beaten, and powerhouse or in terrible mid majors can make insane runs.
Yeah, 100%. And as we know in this sport, all games aren't created equally and graded equally, and
Yep.
all quad one games aren't either. Because
Mm-hmm.
Arizona, two of their losses, Duke is ranked four, Oklahoma is ranked 12th. So it's when you play teams that are that highly rated along with the other power four teams, it's really just shows you because a couple other examples real quick in the net is you got Texas A&M who right now they're 10-2 and in quad one they're 3-1 and Arizona's 0-5 in quad one and they're ahead of them. Obviously that's only one factor, but it just shows that Arizona my point is about bringing this up is that Arizona is as much as even I felt they're so far away and they're fighting for their postseason lives. They're really not. They're really not that far away. Like I said, they win a couple games here in a row in the Big 12 play. They're right in the mix of that top 15 plus. And I do think Arizona will get back into the rankings, the AP poll soon. But Jordan, let's give our predictions for the first game of Big 12 play. They're playing the TCU Horned Frogs at Arizona on December 30th on Monday, 6 p.m. local time, 8 p.m. on the East Coast. And this TCU team, although they do have a better record, they're at 7-4 than Arizona does. This team is pretty brutal when you break it down. They are led by former Arizona State player Frankie Collins. He's averaging 11 a game. They got three guys in double figures, but pretty bleak goes down quick from there. They only average 69 points a game, which is in the bottom 60 teams in college basketball right now. So I think Arizona is going to be a 12 plus point favorite. I think they even could be more than that. What do you think about this?
Yeah, I think especially looking at like from the number, like we've just been talking about all these cumulative numbers over the last 5, 10 minutes. And I think from the numbers, I think it looks very bleak, but I think looking at some of the games and some of the matchups that they've had, like they've beaten Xavier. Xavier's not bad.
Yeah.
Xavier's probably right now, I think their record's a little bit worse because they just went on a 3 game streak against UConn, against Marquette, and against in city rival Cincinnati. Like that's those are 3 back to back games that are brutal. And so I think Xavier is better than the record shows right now. I think they'll probably be finish around fourth in the Big East, and TCU beat them. So I think this team still has talent. I think it'll be inside. I think it'll be inside of 10 points differential with the final score. But it's completely predictive on if Arizona offensively can show up and be efficient or not.
Yeah.
And so I think they will. And so with that, I think they'll probably win probably by about 9 points, or 8.5 spread
Yeah,
is what
they
I would
had
put it at.
TCU, they've lost to good teams. They lost to
Yep.
11-1 Vanderbilt team by 9 points. Their only
Mm.
big loss is they lost to Santa Clara at home by 17 points. That's their biggest blemish. But they did lose
Yeah.
to Michigan, who, as you said, they've had a good year.
Yep.
They lost to them by 12 points. But yeah, I'm in the same camp here. I just don't think because they have a style where they can put up mid 70, but when they're won games this year, they've won a bunch of games in the 60s. Even 2 games ago, they beat South Alabama 58-49. And we've seen Duke hold Arizona to in the 60s, but I don't think TCU is gonna. I don't think they match up that well with Arizona. So I'm gonna go with Arizona same range. I'm going to go with an 8 to 10 point win here. I think they're going to start off conference play successfully with a dub, but then after that, they have another a couple day break, week off, or so. And then they play number 17 Cincinnati. So fires right back up into a top 25 matchup there after the new year. Any other final thoughts before we go today, Jordan?
No, I think the biggest thing I'm looking at, I think in the next two-ish weeks is, are we going to be talking about a team that is inconsistent and we don't know what we're getting from night to night? Because I think if that's the case in a month and we're still like that, I think the jury is out on this team probably not making a March appearance.
Yeah, that's a good take. I 100% agree on that. I'll run off the next 5 games for everybody. December 30th, TCU at home. January 4th at 17 Cincinnati. January 7th at West Virginia. January 11th, UCF at home. And then January 14th, 25 Baylor at home. While they're the ranked 25, Baylor's still a great team, still a very talented team, still a high level coach team for sure. So I think
Mm-hmm.
that first 5 game stretch will tell a lot. 2 ranked matchups, a couple other talented programs. But yeah, I want to thank everybody for tuning in to today's episode of Bear Down Ballers here on the Field of 68 Media Network. I'm Ryan Wall. He's Jordan Pollock. Follow the